Welcome to The Guardian, a law enforcement podcast. I'm your host, Chief Mark Ballard. In today's episode, we will talk about protecting our kids online. Our guest today is Brian Montgomery. Mr. Montgomery is the CEO and President of Alliance Agriculture Risk Management. He's agreed to speak with us today about child safety on the internet and what parents can do to protect their children. Welcome, Mr. Montgomery, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And our second guest today is Corporal Chris Jackson, who is a cyber specialist and serves a very important role within our department and a growing role within law enforcement all across America. Chris, go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, so my background, I have an associate's in computer programming, a bachelor's in management information systems. So I wanted to bridge the gap with law enforcement and tech, but I am a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, Mississippi Attorney General's Office, and the United States Secret Service's Cyber Fraud Task Force. I do investigate cyber crimes, specifically Internet crimes against children, and do digital forensics with that.
Excellent. And the reason why that role is gaining its importance, and we're going to get to the important story that Brian Montgomery has to share, is the Internet's everywhere. It's in our living room. It's within all of our families. And sextortion, it is exploding in its impacts on our communities, and it's starting to develop a trend. And we have to really develop law enforcement to get focus on it. We've got to raise community awareness. And Brian, with that, let's talk about awareness. Talking as a parent, tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be an activist, if you will, for America to wake up to what's going on in our homes.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I guess you would say that we were launched into this, obviously not by our own choosing. Our son Walker died last December the 1st of 22, from suicide that was caused by stress induced from sextortion. He was extorted by somebody out of Nigeria, and we can get into that story, but after we did the forensics on his phone and understood why he did what he did, we just knew we had to fight back. And there were kids, we started learning then that there were kids all over the country that were continuously being extorted from this practice. And it's a trend, as you said, but it's a component in our society where people have figured out a way they can make money, figured out a switch they could flip, and kids would respond to it. And from that point, we just knew we needed to tell the story and understand, help other parents and lawmakers and teachers and coaches and law enforcement and everybody in our society that has a voice know what the reason was that Walker did what he did, because he was a perfectly healthy kid, went to bed living his best life, literally, and we didn't get to see him again. So that's a testament to how much power this has and how big of a problem it can cause.
And the environmental conditions for a predator have never been greater. And listen, there's a lot of factors here. We agreed on this podcast to call it for what it is. First of all, law enforcement's not where it needs to be in tracking these crimes. The moment we get that it's international, obviously, we have to turn to our federal counterparts.
Right.
But there's a lot that goes on domestically with sextortion as well as international. FBI statistics last year showed 18,000 complaints. We have close to 70 million imaging of children that are in some type of nude or explicit fashion. So this thing is going to be about multiple responsibilities. It's going to be about your federal responsibility. We'll get into some litigation and laws there. I think that your law enforcement community has to do a better job in what it's doing. I think that especially at the state level, we got to do a better job, and I think we're starting to see movement there. Schools play a role in this, and faith-based organizations play a role in this. Everybody's got a role, and I think that regardless of what people think out there with, that this is a country that cannot unite, it seems like sometimes on anything with our children, make no mistake about it. We have to get smarter, and we've got to change the way that we're interacting with our children on the internet. And Corporal Jackson, I'm going to call you Chris for the podcast. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in those environmental conditions that predators are taking advantage of our children on.
All right, so I see it beyond the internet as well, but the internet, like you said, it's everywhere. Generally, that puts a predator at different avenues where they can reach the child. So I'm seeing it on cell phones and social media primarily, but I'm also seeing it start to rise in video games, like Roblox for one, or it's designed for kids to play. So there are grown men on there pretending to be a child, and they're talking to these kids, getting on a different app like Discord, or convincing them to download Snapchat. So with more technology, more devices available, especially for children, there are more opportunities for someone with ill feelings, a predator, to reach that child.
But you mentioned an important point that came up. I watched one of your presentation, and with that, I think the mothers and fathers that were in the audience were very confident. They knew all the contacts on the phone. But when you ask who were they playing their PlayStation with, who are they playing on Xbox with, you could see it on their faces, that pause. And the reason why is because they realized, okay, and I get it as a parent, you're not going to be able to keep up with all the brand new social media platforms that are out there. You better be aware, though, that if you're letting your children on the internet, or the worldwide internet, there is a high probability that the individuals might be trying to make contact with them. We're in a crisis right now in America. I think in the state of Mississippi, you can go to some of the FBI statistics. It's pretty high when we're getting suicide, specifically that 13 to 17-year-old teenage. Right now, it seems to be male. Definitely takes the lead on that, maybe through shaming. But what we're getting is the sextortion is the driver of these suicides. And it's something that, again, from a law enforcement standpoint, we want to bring awareness to that. And I could not think of a better cause than something that's very personal and local here than to talk about Walker. And Brian, with that being said, let me pitch that over to you as far as what do parents need to know that you've learned?
Yeah, I think that, one of the comments I heard, we've been talking to lots of parents and teachers and students and you name it, but a parent here in Starkville, I was at a church, and he said, I told him what happened to us, and he said, what I'm hearing you say is, because I trust my daughter, and what I'm hearing you say is maybe I shouldn't. I said, no, that's not what I'm saying at all, because I trust Walker, and Walker was trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And we know that. Now, what we've seen, we know, we had a lot of questions to begin with, but we know that Walker, not a perfect kid, or we wouldn't be here. But the reality is that I could trust Walker. I can't trust the people that phone gives him access to.
Right.
And so that's the reality, is whenever you make a very vulnerable person, which is a kid, which they make decisions out of impulse, out of not being able to see tomorrow. And when they make that decision, they're also on the other side of that is a person that's very skilled and very talented at manipulation that could manipulate an adult, much less a 16-year-old boy. And they can be anything that they want to be.
That's right. Through
this internet in appearance. So what I'd want parents to hear is that an oversight program within the home is a necessity right now. And I think it's going to be a necessity as we go forward, because it's not going to do anything but get worse. And so what I want parents to hear, and I've kind of, because we're going to talk about legislative efforts, we can talk about law enforcement efforts. The very difficult thing for me is that law enforcement couldn't do anything to help me. Couldn't, we can use law enforcement to hold the people accountable, responsible after the fact. But before the fact, there was nothing preventative that you guys couldn't at the time show additional presence like you can in a neighborhood that's getting robbed regularly. Right. All the strategies that you normally use to implement law enforcement are useless in this world.
That's right.
Today. It has to be that way in the future, but it is that way today. And it was that way in our case in December. So parents have got to stand in the gap between now and then. They've got to. If they want to protect their kids, it's not the helicopter mom. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about solid protection. I view the internet, I view what I did with Walker, which is let him have that phone overnight. I let him have a door in his room that's open to the worst our society has to offer. I tell you something we've learned. We've learned that there are some great people in this world. There are. We have still got a lot of really good people. It's not everybody. I mean, you can watch the news and you could question that, but that's not true. The truth is we have got a country and a world that's filled with a lot of really good people. But there are also some really bad people, the worst that we could imagine.
No doubt. And you talked about effective manipulation. One of the things I thought was so effective when you look at interview and interrogation techniques, when you look at manipulation, reading about a predator asking the child about their pet, about the pet dog's name, what you like about the dog, and they would spend an hour or two talking about pets. You're talking about a teenager mindset, right? These are not adults. They haven't got the experiences. So when you are talking to a member of the opposite sex, finds you attractive, what you believe, and now you're talking about pets, that commonality, it really lowers down the ball. And a teenager's mindset many times is a natural divide with the parent, right? And so it is the perfect combination there for manipulation to take place. And these guys are very patient.
Yeah.
Anywhere to 9 months to 18 months, Chris. I mean, you've seen countless stories come through already. Am I wrong on that?
No,
Patience was there?
You're 100% correct. I've seen people pretend to be somebody else and then pretend to be that person's brother and that person's friend to create a whole family atmosphere because it makes the person seem legitimate.
Right.
I mean, well, I couldn't get in contact with Susie, so I talked to her brother for a while till Susie was available. Well, you're really talking to the same person nonstop. And these people, some of them enjoy that. They get off of that. The hunt is what they're after. And it's unfortunate. And I do agree that, I have a 13-year-old boy, and I can't be everywhere at once. But hopefully what I teach him will be. And hopefully he makes those correct decisions. And I know he's not going to make every 100% correct decision. He's a 13-year-old boy.
Sure.
But I worry about him, especially after meeting you, Mr. Montgomery. It's on the back of my mind to keep going with this. But yes, to answer your question, these people are clever. They may also try to be friends with the family, like friends with the mother, and then get close to the family and then get the child. All these tactics work. If they didn't work, they'd stop.
Yeah.
Well, YouTube has its purpose, no doubt. And if you enter in sextortion news, which is something our researchers did in helping us prepare for this program, the first 20 or 30 videos that come up, you could interchange the names of Walker Montgomery with any one of them. Same techniques, same practices, same family devastation. To our viewers, this thing is very real. And it's not just, a state over in big cities or in small rural towns. It's everywhere. It's everywhere a child is accessing the internet and has the ability to do so. And they're making a lot of money at doing this. They recognize the age of the child. So obviously they're not asking for $15,000, but they're asking once they put those images on, it seems they turn the relationship very quickly.
Right.
$100, $150, $1,000, $2,000, trying to generate. And I think that it's important for our viewers to know, establish the relationship with your children now, that if anybody asks for that image, to report it. Don't delete it, but report it. You got to let somebody know. And I think that's where we as a society and a culture of parents in general are losing this in allowing so much free access with the internet that we're not establishing, hey, there are some flags here that when things start to happen, if you can't come to me, come to my brother and my sister, come to your older brother, your older sister, come to somebody you trust, communicate. And that goes a long way at stopping this or advancing into the obviously ruthless game that they're playing upon our children.
Yeah, multiple things there that I think are important to hit on. One, the building that case of familiarity. You guys, I know, Chris, you did. You saw the transcripts of the conversation, and that who Walker was right there on his Instagram page. He was a football player. He loved football. He loved hunting, and it was obvious where he went to school.
Right.
And pulling that stuff out and building that relationship over a real short amount of time. I mean, I think that I say this, and I don't think people really pick up on it, but when I say this was one night, it was one night. We never had the opportunity to see Walker under stress. We had never had the opportunity to detect a problem. We didn't have any of those opportunities. He went to bed without a problem, and overnight is what was enough for him to take this action. And so that pressure that it brings is unpredictable. It's a switch that can flip in the course of just a few moments. And I think that if you get into the psychology of what Walker was thinking, because I've thought about it, Lord knows I've thought about it over and over and over. And, I don't think that, I'd never specifically said, hey, Walker, if you ever get sextorted, if you ever send a video,
right.
If there's a video ever captured of you, come to me. We didn't have that conversation. But Walker, we spent enough time together between our family. We were that kind of family, right? So it's hard for me to imagine that he didn't know that we could work something out in our home.
Right.
I think where Walker's panic button was pushed is whenever these people started showing him screenshots of them sending the videos out to people in his list. So he knew those videos were gone. He knew that content was out in the world,
right,
in people's inbox is what he thought. And the reality was they never sent them, but he didn't know that. He didn't know that they weren't sent. And they were trying to build pressure so he would pay them. But in Walker's mind, I'm just trying to calculate, okay, what made him think? It wasn't that we wouldn't do everything we could do, but what could we do in that instance? We could tell Walker, hey, look, we'll move. We'll do anything to keep you from doing this. Right. And we would have.
No doubt.
But in his mind, he still realized that in his mind, he could see that in the morning he was going to face this. And that's what he thought.
Yeah.
And there's nothing Mom and Daddy can do to fix that. If XYZ has the video, they've got it, and Mom and Daddy can't fix that. They're going to have to face this. And I think it was more than he thought he could manage. And even with a strong personality, strong character, it was even more stress and pressure on him. So I guess what I want parents to hear in that, and anybody else that has interest in helping protect kids, is that we don't know how a kid's going to react. We don't have, your 13-year-old, you don't know. Giving him the presence of examples and training, that all works until you're the one under that gun.
That's right.
Then it's very difficult to understand how we're going to react. It'd be hard for me to understand how I would react in anticipation of that. So as parents, we've got to be vigilant. I think it's the word.
And for the parents listening to think that, well, I've had to talk maybe about imagery, not sending imagery. Artificial intelligence is changing the game too.
It is.
Notice where sextortion now is starting to take the imagery, just the imagery alone, and start to merge nudity with it, which is almost as effective as having an actual picture. Again, if your children are not prepared to report, and if you haven't had that conversation to have them to come to you or to come to someone you trust, then you're really rolling the dice, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's something that, again, while we're having this podcast, this discussion.
Yeah, I think that, you and I were talking before this started. I've had somebody contact me within last week that the kid didn't do anything wrong. He didn't send the image. He didn't send a picture. He accepted a friend request through Snapchat from someone that he didn't know.
Right.
And he took a picture of himself, a selfie basically, with his shirt off, from about his chest up. And the reason we know that he didn't actually send it, he was with his mom. And so immediately response was that picture back to him with a picture of male genitalia. And he said, he freaked out because they said, we're going to send this to all your friends with your face and this picture and say that you sent it, even though he didn't.
Right.
The recipients don't know if that's real or not. So it's the threat of that. And this kid was, of course, you can imagine, was having a panic attack about how this is going to look. And so what did he do wrong? He accepted a friend request from somebody he didn't know. How innocent is that?
That's a pretty high standard.
It's a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
And so I want people to understand that this is not easy. And the job as parents in 2023 is not easy. But I said this before we started, we don't get stronger doing easy things.
No doubt.
And that's what our family's about. And we're going to continue to do our part as much as we can.
Well, Chris, talking about the environment of predators and, some of the techniques, can you expand upon that and how they use their network, or how they might come in through experiences through Xbox or PlayStation, and
Sure.
some of the stuff that you've seen?
Sure. So some of the stuff I've seen, I've seen a few different ways. So predators, I've noticed they're lone predators, but there are also little hives. Have you ever kicked over an ant bed and you just see ants go everywhere?
Sure.
I've seen that same thing
Even
with
in the Deep
predators.
South, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So so when you kick over that hive, you imagine working a case and you find one predator, well, then you find another and another. These people will also talk to each other on Discord and other apps. That way they can hide the shadows.
Okay.
So what I've seen predators pretend to be, again, little children on Roblox, which is a game I didn't know about until I worked a case. They moved the child to a Discord app for gaming, where they convinced the child to send nude photos. I primarily see it on Instagram, more so than other apps. Instagram has gotten better at notifying law enforcement, but again, they can't catch everything. There are some apps that they do not police at all, like Kick, which was meant for like a teenager hangout. Well, that's now become a predator hangout, and you can find drugs and other things on there. But generally, video games and social media, that's where they like to hang out.
Predators are going to go where your children play. And I've heard this, multiple speakers, multiple people have heard you said, wherever your children are hanging out on the social media apps, where they go, this is where the predators are going to hang.
Yeah. So nothing's actually changed in history, because you remember, you're always told years ago to make sure to check the parks, because people hang out at the parks because that's where kids are.
That's right.
The same thing happens in the digital world. They go to where the kids are, and it's up to us to make sure that that park is clear.
Sure. So you lock the door, you take the phone at night. Got to be part of the routine. Don't bother locking the doors, then don't bother taking the phones, because you're leaving your house wide open to worldwide predators, as in the case with Walker, not even local, but overseas. And overseas appears to be getting more aggressive with this, and very organized.
Yeah. Yeah, when you start to look at the prevalence of this now, it's obvious, as to your point. They do the things that are successful. These guys are spending time and energy, a lot of it, creating profiles. I get a lot of questions about, well, was he really talking to a real girl in that conversation? And just to be clear on what happened with Walker, this gets discussed as sending a photo, but, Walker had basically a sexual encounter over what would be equivalent of FaceTime through the Instagram messaging portal. So Walker thought he was looking at a real girl, and Walker is engaging in this sexual act, and they videoed him from the other side. He didn't know it. He didn't know that was happening with a secondary device. So I like to say that because I want people to put themselves in that position. If you could imagine let's just say a sexual encounter that you thought was private, but it's not private. Now it's being threatened. It's not just a picture. It's not just a photo that you can deny. It's very vivid. It's clear. It's what it is. And so, to be able to get that on Walker was catastrophic to him. And so you can imagine the kids out there that how they would react to that. It was the worst possible scenario for Walker.
Sure. Without any of the life experiences to be able to handle that, like
Right.
I said before, it's challenging for us as adults to have to go through some of that. And we see it in some of our reporting at adult level, but a teenager, it's almost insurmountable. Yeah, there was a young man that I was reading about, Brandon Marcus, in October of 2021, almost the exact same format. And Brandon was age 15, and within 27 minutes after being confronted, you mentioned the speed and the velocity of how quick this went down. Within 27 minutes of being confronted by the predator, Brandon took his own life. And we're seeing that, again, over and over and over. So we have to have this discussion. And listen, it's not an easy discussion because it's easier to go to positive. Let's talk about, the football games. Let's talk about positive things, and life should be fun. But in order to address a crisis, you got to bring awareness. And Brian, from your standpoint, what can we do about awareness? Let's talk about that to where, if you've got some listeners that are paying attention and want to get involved, what can they do, and what direction should we send them?
So there's a couple of fronts of defense. The first and foremost is awareness, which is us having this conversation is part of that, and the conversations we're having with anybody that's got a platform is part of what we're doing. But where we see the biggest short-term impact is in the school system. And so, last year we come through this and we're, everybody's upset, and it's really on the forefront of everybody's mind. And so there was a lot of awareness happening in the school system last spring. Well, now we're back into the fall and football season. Everybody's having fun, don't really want to talk about it. So if you're on a school board, if you're part of educational process in any state, I would highly suggest at least once a semester the school system have a program centered around internet safety. Because if we can't educate these kids, you can't just tell a kid one time anything. I mean, that's just not the way their minds work.
That's right.
The dangers have got to be reinforced. I mean, it's like, did they tell us one time when we were in school? I mean, the thing was there were two major fronts in our generation. It was teenage pregnancy,
all right,
and there was drinking and driving.
Yep.
Right. Those were two big drivers in and it stuck.
That's right.
Those things are on the decline today.
Yep.
But it wasn't because they told us one time and it was over. They wore you out with it. And so because it was a major problem, people saw the negative ramifications from it. We're in that place now with online safety, but it's more difficult to address because most of us, and I would put myself in that same boat, aren't educated enough to really have the conversation. And there's not it was pretty easy to say, don't drink and drive and don't have premarital sex or use protection, right? Well, it's harder with this. It's more difficult to protect against because it's really difficult to tell a whole society, put down your phones, throw them away, don't use them. It's not that simple because we're so intertwined with that technology. So awareness of those things needs to be a part of the curriculum at schools. And we're working through some legislative efforts to try to get that passed through, and especially as contentious as the political culture is now, it's difficult, it's hard. But just because it's hard don't mean we don't do it, because we've got to protect these kids.
Well, I think as parents, the starting point is be aware, have the discussion.
Yes.
Start one step forward is the way you end for a long journey. Let's begin that step forward. Chris, from our viewers' standpoint, from yours as an investigator, what advice do you have as we start to wrap up on the podcast?
All right, so the advice that I would put as a father and as a police officer that investigates this, I agree with Mr. Montgomery that it's education. So when COVID happened, every child was given a laptop to the school district. My child was as well, but not one was taught internet safety. They were given this device that had access to the world, but they weren't told how to use it, how to behave properly, how to be a digital citizen. So that was me. Fortunate for him, I mean, this is what I do for a living.
Right.
So he had that advantage. Other parents may not know how to work it. Some can barely work an email.
Right.
So education's key. Like, I'm getting to that spot where I'm going to have to teach my son to drive. So who's going to protect him on the roads? Well, hopefully I can teach him to drive, and school has a driver's ed thing. So that way he has it from both fronts. And that's the way I think digital safety needs to be, from the parent and from the education standpoint with the schools. Now, that's my opinion as someone who does this daily.
Sure.
But you wouldn't just trust your car keys to someone who just took driver's ed. You'd want to see them drive. Well, I also want to see my son act responsibly on it. Besides that, there are different avenues, technology, but technology fails. You can contact your local service provider. I've seen commercials lately for C Spire parental controls. All the major service providers have these. There's also certain phones and apps that can help monitor your child. But what good is monitoring in the middle of the night when you're not there with your child?
Well said. Important discussion, and taking our leadership role as an agency, we will push out a lot of websites that we know are vetted, excellent resources for parents that are out there. I thank you both, Brian. This one is it's close, it's personal, and my brother, we are there with you every step of the way. You know that, and thank you for taking the time just to have a discussion. And we're going to continue these discussions and continue to bring up awareness through this journey, and know that we appreciate you very much.
Well, I think what I said a while ago about there's tons of people that are still, that gives you a positive impression of humanity. I know as police officers, you guys see the worst of most of us most of the time. And I know that's tough to have that perception, and I think it'd be easy for us to have that same perception, but I see the other side of that, which is people just like y'all who care. You don't just do a job. You don't just show up and punch a clock. I mean, you're here to help, and I could say that about all aspects of law enforcement through this process. The FBI has been phenomenal. We're still optimistic about some closure in terms of who perpetrated this against Walker and our family, and we just couldn't be more grateful for that. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, and I know that. As you see examples of that in society where it feels like you become a number, but that's not what we've been.
Excellent. Well said, and a great point to close on. Thank you for listening to The Guardian, a law enforcement podcast, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.